It's a common refrain, like, "Oh, I'm in to write, but haven't done much," and it's true. Like I've done some, but I'm really thrilled when I do it. I feel really good about it, but I don't do it nearly often enough. So, I mean, that's kind of where I am right now.
Well, let me ask this. Sometimes when something relieves the pressure I put on myself to be the next great American writer, when I have success in another avenue, it takes a little bit of pressure off and I enjoy writing more. And so I've caught that in myself. It's like, if you didn't put so much pressure on yourself to like have a piece conceived, written, edited, and perfect within a week, and then winning all the awards, if you didn't put that pressure on yourself, you'd have a lot more fun writing. Do you find that similar for yourself?
I agree. I think just like I was telling you the story a bit ago, that I put these unrealistic expectations on myself, and that when I fall short of those, I'm crestfallen. And pretty much in everything I do. Yeah, and I'm not one of those people who really needs to be creative. I've got to do something with my time, and it shouldn't be just sitting there watching TV. Although I do watch TV, but I mean, if I'm going to do something with the day, I want to have something to show for it at the end of the day. I have done a couple of really targeted, focused writing sessions, and I've been amazed at when I get dialed into that flow state that we talk about, all this new stuff gets generated, and I wasn't expecting any of it. And it makes me think, wow, if you just sat down and did the work instead of feeling like you had to have something ready before you sat down and did the work, you'd get a lot more work done, Yeah. And, And we used to do that when I would role play as a kid. We used to do a lot of Star Trek, Top Secret, a bunch of those role playing games. I played a little bit of Dungeons and Dragons, but I really like the more sci-fi elements. And I kind of stopped role playing in my 20s once I wanted to develop a career, and then I met my wife, and and I dabble in it a little bit from time to time because I still have friends who enjoy it, and I sort of get dragged along for the ride. So it's not like I've completely stopped, but I was very much into it in my teens and in my early 20s because it was a great way to practice storytelling. And I thought as a burgeoning storyteller that it was a great excuse. So I would be a game master, and I'd kind of come up with all of these, not elaborate, but intricate stories that were very plot driven. And that's why it's so hilarious, because I know I've told you stories about how I've always felt my plotting was garbage. And I look back on these role-playing sessions, and I'm like, no, the plot was actually pretty good. And it's because those characters, those people were infusing the dramatic conflict. They had something that they wanted. And my job as a game master was simply to put something in front of them that made it harder to get what they wanted. So as a teenager, I was doing the things that we've been rediscovering over the last few years doing the podcast. I was doing them because it was the only way to make the game interesting. So if you just sort of extrapolate that back into writing and go, your characters, even though you as the writer are doing a lot of the heavy lifting because you have to originate everything. It's a lot easier when you're a game master and you're relying on other humans to inject their point of view into a situation. All you have to do is come up with a setting, some supporting characters, and a main problem. But you can do that work on your own and come up with a setting and supporting characters and a main problem, and then just insert yourself into that role. And what would I do? And then boom, out flows a story. So I mean, it's a lot. This is very simple. Like at its core, it's very simple, but when I go to do it, it's not,
Yeah, I mean, it's always when I'm in, you're talking about flow states, and I've been, as you know, because I've been sharing it with you, I've been working on a small piece that's about 1,000 words long, and I have really been, just been really busy. It's the summer, I was just away in Idaho doing a show and coming back to work, and we're getting into our busy season at work and all of that usual blah, 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 blah. And, but I found myself really more so now than anything doing two different things. Number one, just getting into the work. And I know that I feel that tug of being like, you know what? I don't think I feel it today, but opening the document anyway and finding myself being, just starting from the top, starting to reread it, and then going, oh, wait a minute. This needs to this needs to this, that needs to that needs to that. And so really kind of getting myself into a flow state at a point in the day when I don't really feel like it's going to happen. And, not that it's supposed to happen at any point of the day, but I'm very happy that the work is drawing me into the flow state as opposed to my, sort of trying to arrange the candles around me and then, make sure that the stars are aligned in the proper zodiac form so that I can enter into my creative flow state. And so, yeah, I'm very happy that I'm doing that. It's been really, really good. That was something that I had so much trouble with. We've talked about it before. I always needed to prep for writing, and I want to be different from that. I want to be able to say, time to do the writing. I'm going to do it now. I've got half an hour. Let me open up the document and see what I can get at.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to do it. The few times that I've forced myself to sit down and start typing, I've always gotten something useful out of it. Now, obviously, if you're inspired and you sit down and you're ready to do it and you're focused and nobody's bothering you and you're not surfing the web and your phone's off and everything else and you get into that flow state, that feels like, doing drugs. Like that feels like some sort of crazy elixir.
Yeah.
But that's not the normal state of it. And I think that's it. I'm still falling back into my old habits of, well, I'll wait until I'm inspired. And when I am inspired, it's super fun, but it's just not very frequent. So what I wanted to kick off season 4 with today is actually how to put your main character under pressure. Because I think that's where, for me, the most interest comes in. I've got this story from my thesis called Marjorie, and it's based on this like Middle Ages, pious woman, but there was a book that they made us read, which was basically her account of her life. And she had like postpartum depression, and her husband was, not great. But she had these kind of visions of God and devils and all this other stuff. And so she wrote a book about it. And I was inspired by it. I really wish I could remember her name. But I decided to do a short story in modern times based on her experience. And so it was her getting married to this husband, whose name is John. And basically the beginning of the story was her wedding. And then the rest of the story was kind of a vignettes of these increasingly chaotic visions that she would have. Like there's this one vision that I love, and I wish I could find a place to put it in a story, where she is in the flames of hell and she feels like her arms are butter, like they're melting like butter. And so she takes her fingers and she rakes them across her arm, and she pulls rows of butter from her arms and starts to lick it. And I'm like, that's pretty cool. I don't know where the hell that came from, but that's kind of cool.
All right.
So, and obviously she's in the midst of like this fever dream, and she's actually tearing her own skin. But again, I went back and read that story because it's in my thesis, and I noticed that, outside of a few clever images, a few clever, vignettes, the real part of the story that I was interested in, where it hangs together, is that wedding. And I thought to myself, you're a dummy. You should just make the story the wedding day, because there's so much tension and conflict. And it feels a lot like, any of these novels that gets made into a limited series by Netflix or, whomever, where you have all this dysfunctional family drama and everybody's kind of swirling around the party. That's what it felt like, but it worked. It was really good. So I'm like, all right, well, maybe I'll go back to that. So the whole point of like putting your character under strain or under tension is that's where the story comes out. When you squeeze them and that juice comes out, that's the story. Yeah. So, I've just been really excited to kind of revisit that. We talked a little bit about this, I think back in season 2, maybe. And it was probably bundled in with a lot of other topics. So if you're comfortable with it, I'd love to do kind of a deeper dive on how to put your characters in trouble.
Sure. I mean, let's do it.
All right.
I'm here. You're there. This is what we do.
Well, I mean, why don't we start with Madeleine Tin, the new Poirot.
Oh.
Madeleine Tin, of course, is your character.
Yeah. It is my character in the novel from past seasons. What is it, season 2 now that we did a novel?
Probably. Yeah. Well, you did a novel.
Oh my. Good gravy.
We
I
didn't
don't
do
need-
it.
and-
If by we did a novel, you mean that you did a novel and I was there watching you, then we did a novel. Yes.
Look, here's what's going to happen. That novel is going to get rewritten. You're going to write your novel. I'm going to rewrite mine. You're going to rewrite yours. We're both going to be looking at each other's novels so much. I might as well say our novel.
That's hilarious.
You know what I mean?
No, I get it.
If the piece that I'm working on right now, my little, 1,000-word Subaru commercial piece that I'm working on, if that gets put out, I mean, you're getting a lot of applause. You're helping me a lot with that. I mean, come on.
I love that story. Let's start with that one then. That main character is very interesting, and he has a lot going on in just 1,000 words.
I would, and I'm glad that we're talking about this right now because, in all honesty, I think I'd rather talk about the novel right now. I know exactly how to talk about putting your character into danger, and the reason that I can say that with authority is because I'm always afraid of putting my character into danger and making things difficult for the character. Look, I think it was Kurt Vonnegut. He's like, look, man, you have to have all kinds of horrible things tap into your main character because the reader wants to know what they're made of and wants to see what the kind of person they are, how they deal with these things. And for me, as a writer, I'm always afraid to do that because I'm afraid that I won't be able to have a satisfying resolution to that problem, if that makes sense.
Oh, it does. It does. And, we like to come up with little lists of, like the top 3 ways to do this or that. The first thing that jumps out in my mind, and it may not be the most important, but it's the first one that kind of leaps out at me, is that if your character is afraid of something and you force them to confront that fear, that's an easy way to create strain or tension that they have to deal with.
Yes. And I think one of the things that I'm thinking about as far as my noir novel is going is that I really haven't asked that question. Like, what is my main character afraid of? And I think that, much like we were just talking about how, I'm finding when I open the piece, I'm entering into a flow state for the shorter piece that I'm currently working on. That needs to happen with the novel as well. I just put this giant mountain-sized block in front of me that, like, I'm not going to be able to do this novel because I won't have enough time to do it. I wrote the novel under duress. I wrote the novel in 1,000-word spurts while I was doing a lot of work. So I really don't have an excuse. But when I get back into it, I think that the big thing that I'm going to find is that I haven't. It's just plot point to plot point to plot point without giving the main character, real danger to deal with. Things are happening around her, but not to her. And that's the thing that I really need to question, because once I unlock that, oh man, I think it's going to be great. I'm really excited about that part.
Yeah. No, that's a really insightful thing to recognize in your own work. To have this sort of plot pushing the character forward rather than the character struggling to advance. And so that might be, I've noticed that sometimes supporting characters are more interesting than the main characters. And you see that sometimes in film. Typically it's an actor kind of stealing the show, with a small part that they just crush. But in a book, it might be like in your book, in Madeleine Tin, I think the character of Caroline, I believe her name is, who is the one who, she just leaps off the page and she's very fun to watch. You kind of wind her up and let her go. And so I have much more of a connection to that character than I do to Madeleine Tin, only because Madeleine doesn't do a lot. She's sort of, she's almost like a stand-in for the narrator in a way, because she makes sure that the trains are running on time. But I really couldn't tell you much about her. Yeah. So, I mean, that's just to me, it's a blank page. It's not a problem. It's just an opportunity. It's a blank page. And when you start filling in her personality and her motivations and all of that, she will leap off the page.
Yeah, I think that's a really great way to put it. And I'm glad that you said that. It's an opportunity. Yeah, that's just one of those things that I think I could fall very easily into one of my old kind of, one of the old things that I do, which is like, I'm just not going to have anything happen to her because, like, what does happen to people in real life? Like nothing, right, man? Yeah, I don't want to like shirk the responsibility of that opportunity to really have things happen to her and show who she is and why we're having these problems that she has to deal with. I'm really interested in the idea that the amount of money that's stolen, which is the point, the novel starts and we find that someone's safe has been robbed, but it's not a lot of money. And so I really want to try and focus on that. If it's not a lot of money, what's the big deal? Why is this character so obsessed with trying to find out who stole it when they could just call the cops? So yeah, I think to stop talking about the details of the novel, which no one has read yet.
I've read part of it.
Well, you read part of it.
Yeah.
I think it's a long time until Walden Books has it on their summer reading table. And if you're still working at a Walden Books,
call us.
Yeah, call us. Where are you?
Yeah.
Is it in that weird 8-story mall in Houston? Where is it? It is. You're very, very right. It's about taking a look at your work and saying, for me, I would be afraid. I'm like, if I get somebody into a precarious situation, how do I get them out? Do I have the ability as a writer to get the character out of there that doesn't make the reader go, well, that was lame? Because I've seen so many movies, because I've read so many books that weren't satisfying to me. They might have been satisfying to other people, but I want to, you just want to do a good job. And I'm afraid that if I give too many bumps to the character, I'm not going to be able to get them out of it. So yeah, thank you for that. It's an opportunity.
Yeah. And I mean, I understand that point of view. We've actually talked around this issue before, and I've mentioned to you that it really is the character's, capability to get out of it. If you write something that they can't get out of, then they're probably not special enough for the story. So you need to give them some new power tool or some new capability that allows them to get out of it. And it's really not up to you to get them out of it. It's up to them to get themselves out of it. So if you kind of divorce you from the character and say, all right, well, let's inhabit the persona of Caroline, and here's something that Caroline has to contend with. How would she deal with this? I find that kind of setting them aside and letting them have their own space to make their own decisions, sometimes they surprise me. And that's always really fun. But yeah, I mean, the more we talk, the more I think I've latched onto 4 things that really are easy buttons for introducing more struggle to the character. And the first one we've talked about is fear. What is the character scared of? So even if Madeline Tin discovers that her neighboring business has had some money stolen from their safe, does that trigger something in her that is a response to fear? I'll share with you that as a young boy, maybe 5 years old or so, I was stung by a wasp. No big deal, right? But the way that it happened actually created in me a deep-seated fear that I fight against most every day. And it's because I was tucked into my bed. I was safely, snugly warm. My mom tucked me and kissed me on the head. I'm drifting off to sleep. And in that moment between waking and slumber, a wasp was under the sheet with me. It had been made into the bed, and it was pissed. It'd probably been under there most of the day. My mom used to make she tucked it in tight, tight corners like a hospital. So that thing was stuck under there for a while. It was pissed, and boom, it tagged me right in the upper left thigh, and I howled, and my mom's like, what the hell? So this was a traumatic moment in my life. Yeah. Okay. The kid got stung by a wasp. He lived. I'm not allergic to them. But ever since then, especially as a younger person, anytime I see a wasp, it's like, I feel like it's fight or flight time. Up until now, I'm on the porch with my wife and I might see 2 wasps kind of zip around and I'm like, nope, going in. I'm 51 and I still kind of contend with this. So that.
Well, I'm glad you're more frightened of the wasp than a well-made bed.
Well, I don't make my bed, so it's very slovenly. I mean, the sheets are clean, but I don't make the bed, no. But no, I wonder if, let's do a character analysis. Why doesn't he make his bed? No, but the wasp thing is real. It's one of the few fears that I have, and I know exactly where it comes from. So, okay, now you turn that lens on Madeline Tin. Someone has had something stolen. That's got to kind of trigger something from her past that maybe is only applicable to her. And that is what revs her engine and gets her motivated to do this, even though it's this sort of throwaway nothing to most people. But your exploration of why she takes this so seriously and why she pursues it so diligently is the story. So, I mean, that's where you go. So that's the first thing, is fear. And then the second thing I was thinking of is desire. What do the characters want? And not just want, but crave, worship. What do they absolutely have to have? And the easy way to create conflict or struggle is to take it away from them or put something in front of them so that they can't get what they really, really want.
Yeah. I'm just now, my mind is like, yeah, wait a minute. If I could just do a scene, I'm just doing some writing while we're supposed to be recording. I'm writing in my head.
Well, good.
While we're supposed to be recording.
At least one of us is writing. Good. The third thing would be loss. Okay. Because I'm not asking you to kind of pause and like create new versions of the novel in real time as we discussed. That's ridiculous. So we've got fear, like they're afraid of something and that's what triggers the struggle. The desire, where they crave something, they're desperate to have something, and we put obstacles in the way that they can't get it. And then loss. And yet we've all experienced some kind of loss, and the aching longing that comes from that loss may actually create motivation for us to do certain things. I'm thinking back on my life, and I've probably had moments where I've really wanted to be in a relationship. I kind of remember this in my 20s, and I just didn't know how to go about doing it. I would kind of rack my brain about where do I meet people. And this was after I'd graduated from school, before I met my wife. There was a period there where I just didn't really know how to connect with other people and how to find a meaningful relationship. And as it turns out, I just lucked out. She happened to work with me. And so I feel very fortunate that I met her. But the idea of loss, if you've had something and it's been taken away, well, then now you're probably desperate to get it back or to recreate it in some form or fashion. And so I'm sure there are lots of stories about people trying desperately to recreate, parts of their childhood. Pretty sure that that's the main thing we talked about. What movie was it? Citizen Kane, the whole Rosebud thing in Citizen Kane. He's really trying to kind of recapture the innocence of his youth. It fails, dies, great story. But there's that loss that's driving him to be successful, driving him to, to basically ruin other people's lives so he can chase this fantasy that he'll never be able to get. And then the last one I want to mention is pain. So everyone has experienced pain in some form or fashion. There's some bleed over here, like loss creates pain, fear can create pain, desire can create pain. But these are all things that we can tap into, and we can say, okay, which one of these do I feel like subjecting my character to? And let's see what happens when I poke them here or prod them there or, give them this memory or give them this situation. So,
Those, you've opened up an entire new excitement for me in trying to return to my novel. Yeah, it's right there. It's still next to my bed. It's still in a big giant red 3-ring binder, my first draft. And those 4 things, those are really good because I got to be honest with you. I haven't thought about that. Writing the first draft is very, very easy to do if you're just sort of like going for word count, which is what I was doing. I wasn't going to write a good story because it ain't. But now having some layers and realizing that the only way that this is going to be something is if I give it that real gravitas. Like I do have issues for each of those other characters in the book, I feel. But I've never thought about the main character, and that's the most important thing. And again, that's because I'm like, oh man, you know what? I just gave this character a problem, and now I'm going to have to do another 10,000 words just to figure that out. That's also laziness. I should mention that. Oh man, that's going to be like another 3 hours of work I got to do that. So
right.
Yeah. It's like I gotta catch up on the repair shop on YouTube. Come on. So I think these 4 things are very, very good to think about. It's just so amazing to me that it always comes back to, and here we are starting the 4th season. It's just always going back to the basics. They always work. Yeah,
and it's easy to forget. I mean, I forget it on the regular. So when we set aside time to record and talk about these things, it jumps back to the front of my mind. Oh yeah, right. It's these emotions. Cause I mean, notice none of that has to do with plotting or a character analysis or story shapes or any of that stuff, fear, desire, loss, and pain. It's about the commonality of what it is to be human. Even if your story is about a robot, right? There's a reason we're reading it. And usually that's to explore some aspect of the human condition. And if I can just remember to remind myself of these very simple truths, hey, the story will emerge as you put an interesting person under stress. So just sit down and put them under stress. And I keep trying to remember, hey, if you have a writing session that isn't super great, you don't need to keep that. You can toss it. So don't put a bunch of pressure on yourself that every word you write is perfect and brilliant and exactly where it should be in the story. So, I mean, those are the habits that I'm trying to break. And I guess I'm getting better at it over time, but it's just frustrating because every time I sit down, I'm like, oh yeah, it's easy. Just do this, this, and this. And then I never do it or I do it rarely. Rarely, but every time I've done it, it has worked well. So, I mean, anybody out there who's stuck on a manuscript or, has gotten feedback that the manuscript isn't fully alive or needs something, like sometimes readers will read your work and go, that was nice, and they don't really want to tell you anything bad about it. Well, even if they're like, yeah, that was nice. That was a good story. I liked it. That is, to me, that is failure because they don't trust you enough to tell you it was forgettable. And it's just like, I don't want to write anything forgettable and I don't want to write anything that's just fine. I'd rather it be a flaming pile of newspapers than be fine. Really, at least that's memorable. I mean, I think it is true that you don't have to want to be a great literary writer of note to follow these guidelines. And I think you can create art that's moving and powerful by following these, or you can create pulp fiction that follows these. These work for whatever style of writing you're interested in. Not everyone is Hemingway, right? Present company included. Not everyone's Hemingway. But if your goal is to kind of pump out what I would consider the standard fare, which is still difficult to do, to sit down and pump out Mickey Spillane novels. Like that guy was talented because he was able to pump out a bunch of them. They turned them into movies and people love them and whatnot. I'm not a fan of Mickey Spillane, but a lot of people are. And so if you want to write that kind of hard-boiled detective novel, put your character under stress. If you want to write a fable or a fantasy, put your character under stress. If you want to write a sci-fi epic, put your character under stress. So, I mean, it doesn't matter what you're writing, you still need to put them under stress. And I think the problem that I always put myself in is I didn't want the character to make a mistake. I didn't want them to do something stupid. And so I wrote characters that largely wouldn't make mistakes, and it was uninteresting. So, I mean, when they are put under strain, they will falter and they will fail, and that is interesting. So lean into that because they've got to fall down in order for them to pick themselves back up and accomplish something by the end of the story. If they do nothing but succeed for the entire story, that's a Tom and Jerry cartoon.